Welcome to the Co-Movement Gym podcast. This week we are talking with SharonPrete. Sharon is a human and behavior consultant who uses her knowledge to activate human and corporate potential through well-being. Sharon was the co-developer and lead instructor of OPEX's successful Coaches Certification Consulting module, and she is a trained Demartini Method facilitator. Sharon is the manager of the People and Wellness Department at Perpetual Energy and Rubellite Energy in Calgary, Canada, where she has developed a program that optimizes the potential of the company by inspiring physical and mental empowerment in the employees through the 8 pillars of wellness. Sharon advises athletes, coaches, individuals, and corporations on personal and professional development and achievement through her distinct behavioral lens. I would like to thank our sponsors, Native Path Supplements, Lombardi Chiropractic, Home Sweet Home Cleaning, and Thin Line Martial Arts. If you are enjoying this content, I ask that you support these companies in the description and take advantage of the enticing discount they're providing our listeners by using our code COMO15, that's COMO 15. I thank each and every one of you for being on this journey with us. Now, please enjoy the show. Sharon, welcome to the Co-Movement Gym podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
Awesome. It's always great to chat with you. You've been on the show before. The image of the podcast and the look and some topics are a little different now. So I wanted to have you back on, and I wanted to talk about a topic that has been on my mind quite a bit lately, and you were the first person that came to mind.
Okay.
And yeah, so the energy in the world seems to be like a little off right now. Things seem to be quite negative. We're seeing it in the news. We're seeing it pretty much everywhere, social media. I wanted to get your opinion on, what you think is going on right now. Like, what has tilted things in a negative way?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say as a collective, we've got some growing pains right this second, and I don't have the answer for that. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the answer is. I have a few theories, a few ideas around it. I mean, one of them is the sheer volume of growth that we've experienced in the last 20 years alone. With the onslaught of the internet, technology, our lives have changed. We have these things now, right? Like there's so much has changed. And sometimes when I think we take, 3 steps forward, right now it feels like we're taking a few steps back. And with that capitulation back, it's like I find it's like humans are almost going back in time a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, if you think about your individual, right? Like, so there's the collective and there's the individual. And if you think about your individual life, and we all do this, every single human does this on an individual level. It's like, we'll grow a little bit, we'll reach these new levels. And then, like when you like kind of just go back to your old ways, your old patterns, it feels to me like we're going back to our old ways and our old patterns. And some of the old patterns that we had grown through as a collective were negative. And it feels like we're going back to, in psychology circles, what they call the old familiar. It's what we're familiar with. It's what we're familiar being. And so I think that's where some of the negativity is coming from. We've just stepped backwards into our old patterns of being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's go farther with that. So, like, what patterns are you referencing? Like, give me a few examples.
Well, I mean, this is really loaded and hot right now in the world, and racism, just plain old racism, and real. Any chance you've read the book Spiral Dynamics?
No.
Spiral Dynamics is a really, really interesting book, and it talks about the levels of development that all human beings around the world, regardless of country, these social scientists studied how people develop. And people develop through the same levels. Doesn't matter where you live, you're developing through the same levels of being. And so what happens is, if you think back to history and how we used to be very tribal, right? Us against them, us against them, us against them. And that's what I'm seeing people going back to, is it's a us against them, racism, my tribe versus your tribe. And we grew through that. We really grew through that, but I see us capitulating back into that right now. So that's one example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. It's like it's an election year coming up here in the US. And so you're seeing a huge political divide. And,
Mass.
that
And
goes
that's been
down.
on for years.
Yeah. And I don't know what that's going to take to bring us back to more of like a center and like less tribal. Because it's affecting everything from workplace to relationships, to like who you hang out with and spend time. That's if we keep going farther along that route, we're going to see more violence and distraught in society.
Absolutely. And it really comes down to black and white thinking. It's either this or it's that. It's this or it's
Mhm.
that. And layered over top of that is a more integrative way of thinking, a way of thinking where the whole can be taken into account. One of my mentors, he has this saying that I absolutely love because it always makes me stop and think, which is, no one is smart enough to be 100% wrong. And that one's a tough pill to swallow if you're locked in black and white thinking. Well, if I'm over here, then you over there must be wrong. You absolutely must be wrong. And that's where so much of the conflict comes from, versus a more integrative thinking, which is, you've got a point, you've got a point, where's the solution? And hopefully the solution is rooted in some sort of love and respect.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to bring up a few trends here that I'm seeing, and a lot of it stems from Sharon, like the negativity in the world, and just a lot of what we're talking about now. And I just wanted to get your viewpoint on some of this. So, like right now, at least like where I am in the U.S., the job openings, people can't find workers to fill jobs. That's a huge, huge issue here.
Yeah.
There's a huge issue with consumer debt. They just announced last week there's 17 trillion in consumer debt according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So we're charging our lives away, a lot of people, right? Which we all know what that leads to. We just talked about the political divide
Yeah.
gap that's getting huge. In 2022, we saw the largest increase in social welfare spending in the history of the US. Okay. Maybe that has to do a little bit with the
Yeah.
number of job openings too. And I know a big conversation piece in the US, the middle class. A lot of people are concerned that it's evaporating and it's turning into more of like a working poor in the wealthy. And the last piece is like with social media, it's not new, but now, like, whether it's the government or the food industry or big corporations, it's really hard for them to hide behind lies now. And so the trust in the public with like conspiracy theories and what they think is going on and we've been lied to, all of this is coming to a root now to where like kids 10, 11, 12 are fully engaged in this social media presence and how we're consuming information from whether it's conspiracy or not. And so those are just a bunch of random things that I'm seeing, but I think it all sort of stems from sort of how we started the conversation, right? The energy is off. And so what are you thinking, Sharon, with any of this? Does this resonate with you?
Oh, big time. And the exact same things are happening here, quite frankly. So it's not even unique to the United States, and friends that I have overseas are feeling the same things. So it's a I would say modern world global issue that's
Mhm.
happening. And they seem random, but they're all so interconnected. They're all so interconnected. Do you want me to go down the list? I made some notes so I wouldn't lose sight of some of the things you just said, but the consumer debt piece, and the not being able to fill jobs. I mean, what really needs to happen is we all need to face the reality that in a post-COVID world, the world has changed and the world is different. You can't go through any kind of trauma and come out the other side the same. And COVID, for the vast majority of people, was a traumatic experience, whether conscious or unconscious. You can't take away everything that everyone has ever known and lived with, and not expect that to not have some sort of issue. One of the things I've said during COVID is, like, everyone keeps talking about the underlying physical conditions that COVID's going to exploit. No one was talking about the underlying mental health conditions that COVID was going to exploit. So if you think about how many people, we all go through things growing up. Every single person goes through things that are troubling in our journey in life. And so we all cope with them in different ways. Some people are workaholics. They go to the gym. Some people are alcoholics. They drink or substance abuse. Some people are fitnessaholics, right? Some people go to the gym, because most of us don't actually have the tools to truly deal with whatever it is that has happened to us in our lives. And so we continue to try to shove them down by putting activity on top. And so you've got this whole world full of people that all of those coping mechanisms were instantly taken away. So you take away people's capacity to go to the office or be a workaholic, and now they're left with their shadows, right? You take away their capacity to go to the gym. Now they're left with their shadows. Like, they're all a lot of people had to face a lot of things that they didn't want to face, and used a lot of things as their coping mechanism. And now they're faced with that. So there's that. And then what did you have left? You had online spending left. So I think that actually plays into the consumer debt too. Okay, well, I'll just keep fulfilling myself with things now. I'll keep buying and spending, which was already a problem, not only in the US, but, in Canada as well. And so here you have all these people, and bless them, like, their coping mechanisms were just taken away. And then it happened long enough that it gets to that point of capitulation where there's enough time to think and consider and really look at life and soul search and say, what are we doing here? What am I doing? How am I spending my time? Why am I working a low paying job to pay for daycare when maybe my take home income only ends up being $100 at the end of the month? And then poof, workers disappear. And there's, like, I'm not giving my life force energy to that grind anymore. I can't do it. I was barely doing it before and I didn't realize it. But then when I finally got a break from it, now I realize that's not worth it. So that all plays into it as well, which now, the fix for that has been the increase in social welfare spending that you mentioned. And there is a divide. There's no question. There's the working poor and the increase in wealth, which is really, that's a pattern in society as well. I mean, a big part of World War I was that discrepancy where you had an aristocracy that was the ruling class, and then you had the working poor, and the working poor said enough of that, and many aristocracies were overthrown as a result. And it's human nature. People are only going to work so long for so hard before they realize, like, why does this guy have this and I literally am barely scraping by and getting food on my plate. And then you add in your piece on social media, where you have young kids on social media, you have adults on social media, and then you have the algorithm. And the algorithm is, like, just feeding you more of what you want. I made a mistake on YouTube the other day. I watched something, and now my entire YouTube algorithm is, like, throwing stuff at me that I don't want to see. So now I have to intentionally go in and, like, pick other things to watch. Those things that I like show up. But then you always have to be left wondering, well, what else is out there? I'm getting such a small, narrow view in my social media that's catered to what they think I'm liking. And, my generation, I'm 49 years old. My generation is lucky in that we didn't grow up with that. So if you have some self-awareness, you can realize that everything you see on there isn't necessarily the way the world is. The young kids they're called digital natives, where they've grown up, that's all they've ever known. It's more of a truth to them. So my kids will come to me and they'll be like, oh, look at this is terrible. And it's our responsibility to still teach them critical thinking and have them ask questions about what you see. Is that really true? Is it really true? And how do you know what's true anymore? And that's the world we live in, is the world of disinformation. It's the age of disinformation.
Mm-hmm. Back pain, headaches, and discomfort plague the majority of humans walking around each day. Chiropractic care can be the solution to feeling your best. I know for me personally, it has had a huge impact on how I feel day to day. The problem is that many people fear going to the chiropractor and getting their first adjustment. The team at Lombardi Chiropractic are the best of the best, a team that I've worked with for over 12 years. Visit their website at lombardichiropractic.com, and when you call, let them know you are a listener of the Co-Movement Gym podcast. The majority of supplements on the market are junk and a waste of money. Lack of regulation allows these companies to sell cardboard and a pill, and they get away with it. It's important to purchase your supplements from a company you trust, which for us at Co-Movement is Native Path Supplements. Shop their products at nativepath.com and use code COMO15 for a nice discount at checkout. That's COMO 15. Law enforcement officers have one tough job. While some calls may be routine, many are not, oftentimes putting officers in unpredictable situations. Thin Line Martial Arts is an apparel company that promotes defensive tactics training for officers so that they can be equipped to safely handle a hand-to-hand combat situation. Purchasing apparel from Thin Line Martial Arts promotes this message and allows more officers to attend training. Go to thinlinemartialarts.com and use code COMO15, that's COMO 15, to receive a 15% discount on us. Did you know a clean house reduces anxiety, increases your productivity, improves sleep, and decreases stress? Yes, all of those health benefits just from having a clean house. The problem is that no one finds cleaning fun, except for the great folks at Home Sweet Home Cleaning. Mention the Co-Movement Gym podcast and receive 20% off deep cleans for all clients who sign on using their reoccurring services and start enjoying a clean house today. Sharon, that was actually one of the things I had on here was AI influencing opinions and dividing people even more. And you had said like you get fed more and more of what you're already into, right? What you already believe, which creates more and more of a divide. So I had that on there. So there's an interesting perspective. You clicked on a video and now you're getting more of that one piece. And that can be really, really dangerous when we avoid that other side of the conversation entirely, you know?
100%. Absolutely. I've known people who have gotten trapped in their algorithms, I call it. So they're like, this is happening and this, and everything's going to change. And they actually truly believe, like they're really drinking the Kool-Aid of this is where the world's going. This is what's going to happen, because they haven't even been exposed to the other side. So again, it's black and white thinking, which you're actually just giving me a thought right now, especially with AI and that sort of thing. If humans developed in that step fashion where we started with black and white thinking and then we moved towards integral thinking over time, our algorithms are really at that if this then that. It's quite black and white. Depends how they're programmed, and it depends who they're programmed by, because they're still programmed by humans. What not I'm throwing something else into the mix too, is that there's a real changing of the mentality right now between women and men, and the place that women have always held and what we've always thought to be true based on how things have progressed over the last century. And the algorithms, I can't remember, I think it was Melinda Gates maybe, she was talking about there's still only 20 to 30% of people working on these AI algorithms that are women. And so you're having a disproportionate viewpoint because it's just, we're different. And not to mention, like, that's black and white too, right? There's a fluidity in between all of that. And so it depends who's building the algorithm and how that's all going to go as well. So that will move things in one direction or another until more people get involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's very, very interesting. Talk about a few subtopics here. We're going to stick with this central theme. But I was reading the other day, I don't know where it was an article online, but they were talking about that civilization has had it too easy for too long. And so this is part of the issue that we're having in today's world. You're laughing. So we've really had like no major wars, famine, disease, like true, like, where multiple millions have died and we've had to like regain our tribalism because civilization is under threat, right? Like we've had it really, really easy. I'm sure that you've seen this meme of like the guy in like the 50s and he had like the machine gun and the cigar sticking out of his mouth. And then you've got the guy today with like the pajamas and he's holding his latte. So like, we have had it really, really easy. Even like if you look at like my grandparents, farmers burning wood to stay warm. They had a garden. They did a lot of like hard work, manual labor. There was consequences to like the wrong choices. Let's say, you had an ice storm in May and you lost your crop for the year. So like,
Yeah.
what do you have to say to that? I'm curious on your opinion.
Well, it's interesting. My dad's dad was quite old when he had my dad, and so my grandfather actually fought in World War One. He was born in 1897. I never got to meet him, of course, but he. It's interesting because I think about him often because my one auntie had told me a story where my grandma asked my grandfather, like, what was the war like? And this man would just get tears in his eyes and he'd just say there's just some things you don't talk about, and that was their coping mechanism. That plus for him it was alcohol, and so they lived through trauma. And I think what's interesting about our generation, and I agree with you fully, like we've in North America, in Europe, in many parts of the world, we've had it pretty good. Not all around the world, right? Like not all around the world has got there, but you and I talking, we've had it really, really good. And so we've had it so good that we've finally got to address trauma. Whereas I think most peoples before us experienced some sort of massive, massive, massive like collective trauma. And I think COVID was our first taste of like, oh, this is hard. And even then around here, it was like, it was hard for a lot of people. It wasn't World War hard in that regard. And you got to be careful when you're talking about trauma because there were some people that went through some really awful things, separated from loved ones and that sort of thing. So I don't want to sound like I'm diminishing that in any way, shape, or form. And so that generation before us, they went through some things. So my grandfather would have fought in World War One, lived through the Great Depression, and then World War Two. That was in his lifetime. And so I feel so lucky, and it's interesting to watch because the trauma fallout from his generation passed down. So I know my dad, for example, and they talk about even the genetics of trauma and alcoholism and that sort of thing. That is passed to my dad. And my dad has, and bless him, he has trouble connecting with people because when you have an alcoholic parent, you don't ever really get that true connection. And so while we've lived with the fallout of that stuff, we've also gotten to the point as a society where research is being done on trauma. There's a much better understanding of how to handle those things and what you can do, but that only could come when you're not in the middle of it, right? When you're in the middle of trauma, there's no time to actually research. So we're very, very, very fortunate that society was able to take a step that far so that we could grow.
Mm-hmm. Talk about lack of real work. I've heard this term by Dr. Victor David Hansen. I don't know if you follow any of his work, but he talks about in today's world where a lot of us are lacking real work that produces results and experiences that we can see, feel, and touch, as opposed to like sitting in a cubicle putting data into a computer day in and day out, there's no real work component to that where you're building it, growing it, fixing it, right? And not to say either is right or wrong, but what he was getting at is that real work produces a feeling of satisfaction. Whether you build a chicken coop or plant a garden or fix a car or, shovel a driveway, right? There's some real work there. What are your thoughts on that? Because my life, like, it's a hybrid blend. I do a lot of non-real work. You could almost consider this podcast, right? We're sitting comfortable chairs talking, but then I also garden, farm, I build stuff, for fun. I hunt. So there's a real work component there too.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on that?
That's interesting. I haven't thought about it that way. So this is new to me. That as soon as you said like sitting at a computer punching in data, one of the first people I thought of was an accountant I know that I hired because they love doing that. Like that's work to them. And so that was where my brain went first. Is well, there's going to be some people in the world that feel like whatever data, like software engineers and that sort of thing. They're like, I'm doing real work. So let me ask you this: is it more on a real work where it's a physical completion of something?
Yeah.
Like how does
Yeah,
he discern?
Yeah, that's what I think when he was mentioning that in that podcast. That's what he was getting at. He was coming from a farming background, but he's a economics professor or former economics professor at Stanford, in the Hoover Institute. He
Okay,
spent time with but he lived half of his life in that blue collar stage of real work. And that was just a
right,
hypothesis that he had, that he feels like a lot of people are lacking a sense of satisfaction because they're not producing what they are personally deeming as real work.
right,
And again, the accountant example that you gave, if that individual perceives that as real work, which it is, if that's what he's perceiving, then that's great. But he's saying, I think that there's a number of people that aren't feeling satisfied with the work they're doing because it may not be real work to them.
right. Yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense to me. And I do see that with people. I really do. I do see people who feel unfulfilled. Sometimes they feel, and this was a little bit of a twist to it because you know me, I like to do the twist and take it to a place where someone else might not. I see a lot of people who really want to love their work, like they truly want to love their work, and this is where I think there's a leadership opportunity, where you'll see leadership doesn't understand what might fulfill that person, and that person might get pegged in a hole, or their talents might be stifled because somebody might come into a company and they might have like amazing things to offer. And if the company has no idea what amazing things they have to offer because they haven't even bothered to have the conversation, that person then might be doing what they're told because that's the hierarchy of their system. Is boss tells you to do this. All jobs at the most fundamental level come down to a paycheck to feed yourself and your family. And so, when that is at risk, and depending on the hierarchy of the organization and the culture of it, if it's not necessarily a psychologically safe place to work, then people will feel very unfulfilled. But there might actually be an opportunity in those currently unfulfilling jobs for them to become fulfilling. I can give you an example of that I ran the wellness program, still run it at a company, and in having conversations with people of like, what do you love to do? Just ask them like, what's your passion? Like, what do you actually love? And this one woman who is a geologist, she's like, oh, well, in my spare time, I'm a shaman. And I was like, what? That's amazing. Tell me more about it. And as she talked about it, we ended up bringing her in as a resource for the staff. So we had a health and wellness room, and she could practice on lunch hours or during the day, even. Like, we made the space and the time for that to happen. And her work in the company became very fulfilling. She liked her geology, she loved her shamanism, and she actually got put both of those together. So she was getting her paycheck, she was doing all of those things that were required for survival, and that was happening. So, and that's not this or that, right? It's not a black and white. It's a this and that, which is more integral thinking, like I was talking about. And we had another one, and I'm trying to remember what she was an accountant actually as well. She was a meditation instructor, so we allowed that to happen in the company. Not allowed, like you're not allowing someone to do it, but you know what I mean. You're creating the space for actually that to flourish. And so in those moments, you might have someone who's a software engineer, for example, or someone doing IT or help desk. You're like, what else do you love to do in that? And they're like, oh, I actually build Power BI apps on the side. Like bring that skill here, right? And then you can create positions. You don't have to have a position and fit a person inside of that. You can have a position and see what other talents you actually have around you and allow those to flourish and grow. So that's how I think you can make more meaningful work in something that already feels maybe not so meaningful.
Would you agree that most companies are not doing that, what you just described?
Yes, I would agree. Yeah,
Mhm.
I would hold. And you know what? And not to their fault or their detriment. It's like we live in a busy, busy world, right? We're inundated with stuff all the time, and that's just one of those thoughts that if you just step back and think about it, it's like, oh, that makes sense. You can do it. And it's not hard to implement. It's a conversation, right? And if you have any sort of cycle of with staff, we have a alignment and accountability cycle that we do with our staff twice a year, and it's this a set of questions we ask them. That's one of our questions is like, what do you enjoy and love doing most, and then can we do that here? So it's easy to implement. Like it's so simple to implement, but it's so hard to break a habit. So
Yeah. I love that, Sharon. That is very cool. I'm hoping that more companies can catch on to that because you're talking like finding their highest values and then trying to link their highest values to the current position that they're in and creating like a hybrid blend,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and it was ended up being conference ended. Then you had a round table, and at this round table of there was a couple executives and a few employees, and that was meant to be that way as a mix, so where the employees were allowed to ask the executives like, "What do you think?" And this one executive, he was pontificating. It was kind of amusing. He was like, "Well, you just got to find your superpower. You just got to find your superpower." Which relates to this, right? Because maybe that woman's superpower was her shamanism or her capacity to teach meditation. So it wasn't wrong. His delivery was poor because he was talking about it like it's this, your superpower is this big thing. I was lucky enough to have a mentor very early on who told me that the thing you're best at, you can't even see because it's innate. And whatever's innate, you just do. And I was like, well, then how do you see it? Like, how do you know what you're great at? And he's like, you're great at it when you're saying something and no one else knew that before or thought that before, like they weren't thinking that way. And you can see light bulbs going off for other people. Or on the negative side, if you're saying something, you're like, why don't they understand that? Like, why don't they see that? Why don't they see what I see? If people don't see what you see, that's part of your innate superpower. And so, whatever that innateness is in someone, they might not be able to see it and come to you and say, I'm really, really good at this. So, another leadership opportunity is really watch for what someone's really great at and be humble enough as a leader to to look for those things so much of the time because our hierarchies are this way. We're like, I got to be better than that person. I have to be better than them. I always do this where it's like someone has to be lower on the food chain than you, and you're up here. So a lot of leaders up here don't bother to see like what's right in front of them. But if you can see what those talents are, then you can create positions around those talents, and now you've got a fulfilled workforce.
Yeah, and then with fulfilled workforce, it's more profitable. You can
Oh,
grow, you attract better people.
very
The energy there is better.
yeah, like they're pumped. They're pumped to come to work because they are doing what they love. And everyone who, you know, you and I have talked about that before, where it's like you jump out of bed because you're excited.
Thanks, Sharon, for being on the show. We will continue our conversation next week, where we dive into the definition of success, why kids are living at home longer, Sharon's business, the Coaching Collective, and much more. One last message. I ask that you please check out our show sponsors, Lombardi Chiropractic, Home Sweet Home Cleaning, Native Pass Supplements, and Thin Line Martial Arts. Their links are in the description. Not only do these companies produce outstanding products and services, but they're providing an enticing discount to all listeners who use code COMO15. That's COMO15 at checkout or when you give them a call.